YouTube, what's going on? How do you like this new setup? A little bit better of a view slash lighting, right? I don't have actual professional lighting, so sometimes you gotta get a little creative, and raise the tripod up. We're closer to the window now, and I think this probably looks much better. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into the episode, and today is going to be my first time talking about personal finance, budgeting, and this isn't investment advice of any sort, but it's more about the behavioral aspect behind personal finance, and in this case saving, and why you feel like you can't save anything. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that are like, Sean, hey, I would love to save money, but you know, life is life. There's just too much going on. I got all these obligations, I got all these bills, and at the end of the day, when I look at everything, I just realistically, like, there's not much left for me to save every month. And I hear you, because I was in that mindset myself not all that long ago. And I'm also very well aware that there are plenty of people out there who honestly can't save, or if they do save, it's just a little, and that's understandable. You know, I understand that there are situations out there, there are things that a lot of us can't wrap our head around in our unique circumstances, that saving just isn't the priority. The priority is just getting by and surviving, and that's okay. But this conversation is not aimed at people in those situations. This conversation is aimed at people like myself, maybe 18 months, 2 years ago, and people like you, specifically the average millennial or someone under the age of 35 who makes a good living. And honestly, there's really just no excuse to not be saving. It really all comes back to what's in your head. And honestly, there's a disconnect in terms of your mentality of what it needs to be and what it is. Because really, when it comes to saving money and being smart with your finances, it's honestly more of a behavioral thing than a living situation, circumstance, actual what you're making thing, if that makes sense. And just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, so I just did some quick research before I hopped onto this vlog, and I looked up the average saving rates for actually all age groups, but specifically millennials. And per the Wall Street Journal, this study came out earlier in 2019. The average saving rate for millennials, so people under the age of 35, was negative 1.8%. Now, this might be shocking to you, and it may have been shocking to me a few months ago, but after I took the time to go through my finances, and I consider myself someone who's fiscally conservative, you know, like I'm an accountant. I thought I was doing a pretty good job, but when I actually sat down and looked at everything, I was spending more than I was making, and I bet you that there's a lot of people out there who are in the same boat. I know there is, the study says so. But honestly, don't feel too bad, because the study breaks down each generation, and it's honestly, it's sad, guys. So the average American between, 45 to 54 is only saving 5.7% of their income. And I got news for you. If you wait until you're 45 to start saving for your retirement, and then on top of that, you only save 5.7% a year, you're not going to retire unless you're an extremely high earner, unless you get lucky, unless you make some incredibly well-timed investments. You are likely not going to be able to retire and are going to have to work for the rest of your life. And honestly, like, we all want to avoid that, right? I'm not someone who necessarily dislikes working. I enjoy going to work, but with that being said, I don't want to work forever. So it's imperative that we get our financial house in order, we save, we plan for the future, so that we don't have to be a slave to our jobs, we don't have to be a slave to the dollar, and we can ultimately enjoy this beautiful life with the people who matter the most to us, and do things that we want to do. Because one of my favorite sayings that I always love to say is, this is not a dress rehearsal, guys. This is your one shot. You don't get to do it better next time. You live once. Make the most of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. I came up with 7 reasons why you can't save money. And honestly, a lot of these reasons came from life lessons that I learned. So these are reasons that I felt like I can't save money. And I feel like this is going to be applicable to a lot of people out there, because I'm 28, almost 29 years old. No, 28. Halfway to 29. I'm a millennial. I have a good job. And I feel like I'm pretty relatable. I feel like there's probably a lot of people out there who are just like me. So first and foremost, and this is going to be the most broad, topic that I'm going to lay out there, and that's the hedonic treadmill. And some of you may be familiar with this concept, but more or less what the hedonic treadmill means is every time you get something new, eventually that shininess wears off. Think of when you were a kid on Christmas morning, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrated growing up. You'd get presents, and in a couple of months, those presents, it was awesome when you got it. Maybe you got the new PlayStation, maybe you got a new bike. Like, eventually, yeah, you liked it, but eventually it kind of lost its luster, right? So every time we get something new, it actually releases dopamine in our brains, and we find ourselves chasing that each and every time because we're on this hedonic treadmill, right? It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And until you train yourself to get off the hedonic treadmill, it's going to be very hard to avoid making those impulse decisions just to satisfy that, I don't want to call it carnal, but just that internal desire we have. And it's no fault of our own, right? It's how we're wired as human beings. I'm sure there's some evolutionary concept, back that goes back to cavemen and the Neanderthals or something as to why this is the way it is. But you have to find a way to at least get off of it, or to train your impulses. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to save money. And I say that as someone who's still working on that every day myself. It's not easy. It takes dedication. And I think what helps with something like this is perspective, right? So every time you're about to make a significant buying decision, a significant financial decision, think about, yes, I really want this, but A, do I need this? And if I don't really need this, like I don't need this to actually survive, what does this mean? Is this going to set my planning back? And in some instances, yes, it might, but it's something that means a lot to you, and that's okay. And we're going to touch more on that later. But if it's just kind of like, meh, that's when and honestly, this is an exercise that's going to be unique to every person. You're going to have to evaluate your life, what's really important to you, what matters. And you kind of just have to take some time to sit down, reflect, and think about it. Because again, until you get off that treadmill, until you get out of that cycle, it's going to be very difficult to save money. Okay, so now we're going to get into the actual meat and potatoes in terms of the actual things you're spending money on that is preventing you from being able to save. First and foremost, and I think this is probably the biggest one on the list, I think this is probably the one where you can probably make the most headway in most cases. I know for my girlfriend and I, it was 1000% the biggest case for us, and that is your current living situation. Whether it's an apartment or a house, chances are you probably are living somewhere that's too expensive. In the case of a house, maybe you overextended yourself and you went ahead and bought the biggest home you could qualify for. So you went to your mortgage loan officer, you got approved for a $400,000 loan, and you're like, yeah, let's go out and buy a $400,000 house. We're only going to put 3.5 down because we're a first-time home buyer. And then before you know it, your payments are just too much, but it's okay, right? Because you have an investment and it's your house. Wrong. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother video, but you can't overextend yourself on your primary residence, especially as it relates to buying a home. Don't buy the most expensive home that you qualify for. Buy what you can afford and spend money on each and every month that isn't going to limit the rest of your life, especially as it relates to what you can put away in savings each month, right? And then as it relates to the apartments, and that's really what I want to touch on, because I feel like this is really relatable to a lot of you out there and a lot of millennials. I know it is for us because we don't own, we rent, and I know a lot of millennials aren't buying, a lot of millennials are renting. The problem is, a lot of us are renting in extremely overpriced cookie cutter brand new apartment complexes. I mean, I don't know about you, but we live in Orlando and these things are popping up everywhere. You know what I mean? Like they look kind of the same. Like they have like really nice pools, they have a gym, they might have a little dog park. And these things, like they're awesome, don't get me wrong. Actually, that was the last place we lived before I moved into this apartment. It was relatively close to downtown Orlando, which actually we live closer now, we pay significantly less. But we were the first ones to ever move into the unit. It had a dog park, it had a bike trail, it had an amazing pool. It had like Amazon Prime lockers that whatever. It had like a bunch of really great amenities. But it was about half the size of where we live now. We now live in a 2-bedroom apartment. And we were paying roughly, added up everything, we were paying roughly $1,700 a month in rent for that apartment. And that does not include utilities. So, I mean, that's insane. $1,700 for a 1-bedroom. Honestly, so I used to live in New York. I lived in New York a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago or so now. And I'm like, dude, we're paying $1,700 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in Orlando, Florida? No, I'm sorry. Like, I can find a relatively decent apartment in Brooklyn, Queens, somewhere for the same price in New York City. Like, this is insane. And the reason why we fall into this trap is just because it's so easy, right? Like, when you're looking for a new apartment, these apartment complexes are really good at marketing. They're everywhere, you know, and chances are a lot of your friends live in apartment complexes like this. So when it gets time to move, we don't really do a lot of research. You might go take a tour. I know my girlfriend and I did. We fell in love. We knew it was a little bit out of our budget. We knew it was pricey, but we ended up signing a lease, and we lived in an extremely overpriced building that for a year. We lived there for a year. Now we live in a building that was built in, I want to say this was built in the 1980s. I think it actually used to be an old motel. It's not like the nicest, but we are downtown Orlando. I can actually walk to my office. It's about a half a mile away. We have a 2-bedroom apartment. And yes, we did sacrifice on certain things, like there's no washer and dryer in unit. There are washer and dryer on site, however. And the pool and stuff, there's no gym, and the pool isn't nice, but it's literally right outside my window right now. So I can just literally just walk outside. And I mean, it gets the job done. And I don't know if I said how much we're paying, but we're paying $1,300 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, much closer to downtown. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. We're saving $400 a month just on rent, right? So I'm rambling at this point about this topic, but you get the point. Chances are you're probably spending too much on your living situation. Really reevaluate that the next time your lease is coming up, or if you're in a house, I would start thinking about different ways to supplement it. You know, if you want to rent out part of your house, if you want to think about getting out, although that is much easier said than done. Reevaluate it. It will save yourself a ton of money. You might have to do a little bit more digging to find a place like this, but trust me, they're out there. If they're in this city, they're in your city. You just have to go ahead and find it. Okay, so number 2, another big one, your car payment. Chances are you probably have a car payment. I think I saw something the other day. I think the average car payment in America is between $400 and $500 a month, which is just absolutely insane. I thought my payment was bad. I roughly pay around $250 a month. I lease a Hyundai Elantra, which is actually up in February 2020, and I thought that was a lot. When I saw that the average car payment is between $400 and $500 a month, I mean, honestly, if you're paying that much for your car payment and you're not making 6 figures at least, I don't see how you're saving money. I just don't. It's too much money. If cars mean everything to you, great. Spend the money, but you have to cut back in other areas. If you don't, you're going to regret it in the long run, unless you just honestly don't care and you don't mind working forever. And I think the mentality around the car payment is the mentality of everyone's doing it, right? So something my father said to me once, and I completely disagree with him on this, is the fact that, you know, because he's always leased, right? He's always leased. And I ultimately, the next time I get a car, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to own it outright, and I'm going to run that thing into the ground so that I don't have a car payment, right? Because that's $250 a month I'm wasting right now on a car payment. Because honestly, cars don't mean that much for me. It's a thing to get you from point A to point B. But getting back to what my father said, so he said, you just have to accept it. You know, car payments are a way of life. You're always going to have one. And I'm just like, why? Like, that doesn't make any sense. They don't have to be a way of life. They can be part of your life if you choose, but there's no reason why a car payment should always have to be a part of your life. So yeah, I mean, there's not too much more to say on this. We can go on and on each of these topics probably for a good while, but let's just leave it surface level for now. Your car payment, you're probably paying too much. Take a look at it. If you're in a lease, think about going to something cheaper next time. Honestly, think about buying a used car and paying it off and running it into the ground. That way you can build up a savings, and then eventually, once you're better off and you have a nice little nest egg, you have investments, you have savings, an emergency fund, etc., then you can go ahead and treat yourself and get something a little bit nicer. Okay, hold on. I gotta take a drink. My mouth is getting dry from all this talking. Okay, so the next one's a big one, and I actually got this one from Ramit Sethi, who wrote the book I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And I would highly recommend that for the behavioral aspect, what I've kind of been alluding to this whole entire time. I think it was really eye-opening for my girlfriend and I when we started learning more about his methodologies and theories and approaches to certain matters. And the one I'm going to touch on now is you haven't figured out what matters yet. And what I mean by that is, so the biggest thing Ramit loves to say is buying lattes or not buying lattes every day, if you love buying lattes, is not going to make you rich, right? So that's like a $5 decision. You know, obviously in moderation, like if you're getting a latte every day, like you can easily burn up how much you're spending on coffee on a monthly basis, but that's aside the point. When I say you haven't figured out what matters to you yet, what I mean is this, right? So if you love your coffee, that's fine. Go ahead, get your coffee. The thing is, if you love your coffee, you also can't be spending a lot of money on clothes every month, and you can't have the nicest new computer, and you can't have a really expensive car. Do you get where I'm going with this? Or if you love your car, you can't be going out on the weekends all the time, as well as buying really expensive dinners, getting the new phone every time it comes out, etc. You haven't figured out what matters to you. Because the key to this concept is figure out what matters to you, have guilt-free spending on that item, and then don't spend that much on everything else, right? So for example, for my girlfriend and I, we really love going out to a nice dinner one or two times a month, maybe 3 times a month. But we also had a habit of spending on going out to lunch when we went to work, right? So we really figured out that those lunches going out to work, and honestly, it wasn't something that we loved. It was more of laziness of not wanting to bring our own lunch, and it was just kind of convenient, right? So we're like, why are we doing this? Because not only is it not allowing us to save money, but then if we're spending money on going out to lunch every day, it ultimately limits us on what we can feel guilt-free about of our time together and spending money on meals at a nice restaurant, just the two of us. Does that make sense? So kind of wrapping this one up, you have to figure out what matters to you, spend money on what matters to you, but then you have to cut back in the other areas, because if you don't, again, it's going to be very difficult to save. Okay, and 5, okay, so this one, honestly, I've kind of already touched on it already, and it's just that everyone is doing it trap mentality. So this can be classified as keeping up with the Joneses. You know, you look around, everyone has the newest iPhone every month. Everyone's in car payments that they may or may not be able to afford. Everyone's living in these luxury apartment buildings. Everyone's getting lunch every day. Everyone's going out every weekend. And it's really easy to be like, well, you know what? Like, I want to do that too. Everyone else is doing it. There's no reason why I'll make more money, down the road. We'll all make more money down the road, and then it'll all be fine. Everyone's doing it. There's no way we're all making poor decisions, right? Well, I got news for you. Negative 1.8%. Let's go back to that number. Negative 1.8%. You have to stop worrying about what everyone else is doing. You have to put yourself in a silo. You have to focus on what really matters to you. If you're single, what really matters to you. If you're in a relationship, what matters to you and your partner. And you have to understand that it's going to take work to focus on what matters to you, right? If you're worried about keeping up with the Joneses, if you're worried about what everyone else is doing, it's going to make saving a miserable experience, and it's probably not going to last that long. You have to change your mindset. You have to think that this is where I want to be. This is how I'm going to get there. This is what my life's going to look like along the way, if that makes sense. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much more time on it because I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so next, number 6. Number 6 and 7 are actually kind of similar in terms of being like the same topic. But yeah, so number 6, let's get into it. Number 6 is you don't know where your money is going. And what I mean by that is you just don't know where your money is going. So you would probably be shocked if you took the time to look at your spending on a monthly basis. I guarantee you a lot of you out there would be like myself and you were spending more than you're making. So what I highly recommend doing is using an app like, I know a lot of people like to use Mint. Personally, since I'm an accountant, I don't mind working in Excel and I like analyzing numbers. I like that kind of thing. So what I do is every single month I actually have a spreadsheet, a file going, and each month gets its own tab. And you don't have to do this every month. You just have to figure out a baseline of where your money's going, right? But every day I'll take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I'll look at what I spent that day and then I'll log it. I'll put whether it was on my credit card, whether it was on my cash. I'll put the vendor. I'll put the categories, if it was food, if it was rent, if it was entertainment, and then I'll put a little bit of a note on the purchase. And then what that does is at the end of the month, I have a nice comprehensive story on my Excel spreadsheet. I can filter by how much did I spend on food, how much did I spend on entertainment. I can look at the notes of like, wow, like that was stupid. I bought this item on Amazon. I really didn't need that. You know what I mean? So you have to figure out where your money is going, whether it's through Mint, whether it's through Excel. It's going to be very difficult to change your habits until you actually take the time to reflect, see where everything's going, and then that's going to allow you to see where you can and can't cut back on, right? So like last month we spent too much money on food. So my girlfriend and I sat back and we're like, you know what? We ate out at lunches a little bit too much. We're spending around $300 to $400 a month on groceries. There's no reason why we were spending X amount when it was all said and done, when we were spending that much on groceries, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So, and then number 7, finally, as I said, this one's related, and this is the fact that you are most likely not paying yourself first. You're spending and then you're saving whatever's left over, which is most of the time 0. And this is simple. It's almost like a lot of people like to call it something like reverse budgeting. You're reverse engineering the process. Every time you get paid, you have to look at your financial obligations. So what has to be paid, credit card bills, car payments, rent, etc. That obviously has to get paid. Then you have to allocate what you want to save, and then you spend what's left over, right? And it might be a little bit difficult at first. You might be in credit card debt. You might have a car you can't afford. There's a whole range of issues that might be happening, and you might have to figure those out first, right? Figure them out. That way you can actually put something in savings eventually after it's paid off. You've got out of that situation, or you've changed whatever's happening in your life. Okay, so wow, this video ended up being quite long, and I apologize. I'm still getting used to this whole YouTube thing, and personal finance, budgeting, the behavioral aspect is it's something obviously I really care deeply about, because I think it's something that matters, and I think it's something that can make a huge difference in your life if you take it seriously and you just know where to start. And honestly, like, this whole entire video can just be summarized. You're probably living above your means. You got to figure out a way to live below your means, to save. That way you can enjoy your life and you don't have to be a slave to your job forever and ever and ever until you ultimately die. That sounds sad. Don't be sad. But yeah, that's it. Remember, negative 1.8%. If there's anything you take away from this video, take that. Do not be in that negative 1.8%. And if you have any questions, comments, if you want to know like my approach, if you want to know what my spreadsheet looks like, feel free to reach out to me in the comments or on Instagram, whatever. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I promise I will work on shortening these in the future. I just got to, practice makes perfect. All right, guys. See ya.